Alright, David Harry here. So, have you got yourself a base M4 Mac Mini, and maybe it is the base version because you're simply on a tight budget and you can't afford to spend more than what the base version is. However, when you bought this, you were thinking, well, at some point I'm going to have to get some external storage as well, because as you will have been fully aware of, the internal storage on this is only 256 gigabytes. Well, you've now come to the point where you're going, I need some external storage. However, you're looking around YouTube and it just seems that everybody on YouTube is telling you that you need a Thunderbolt 4 or a Thunderbolt 5 or a USB 4 enclosure with super fast storage inside of it. However, you're sitting there thinking, maybe I don't really need something like that. All I want is the most amount of external storage that I can get for the best possible price. Well, what I'm going to show you in this video is such an SSD. So this is a SATA SSD inside of a SATA enclosure or a SATA to USB-C enclosure, and this is going to give us 4 terabytes of the cheapest storage we can possibly get hold of for anything external to any of our Macs, not just the Mac Mini but any of them. Anyway, this SATA SSD and also the SATA to USB-C enclosure that I've got here were sent to me by ORICO in exchange for a review, and no money has changed hands. Anyway, what I'm going to do shortly is to show you how to put one of these together, how to format it and all the rest of it. Then I am going to do 2 sets of speed tests. The first one is going to be on the Mac Mini, and then the second set of speed tests will be on my M4 Max MacBook Pro. Now, the reason for doing that is because I only have like so much spare storage on my Mac Mini because, well, I've basically filled it up with me programs, which is exactly what most people are going to end up doing. So I don't have that much like spare space to do the speed test with. So the real world speed test on the Mac Mini is only using 30 gigabytes for like the folder size. However, what I've then done is to use the exact same SSD with a 400 gigabyte test folder on the M4 Max here, or the M4 Max MacBook Pro to give it its proper title. Anyway, so there we go. That is exactly what I'm going to do in this video. So I'm going to crack on with it. There'll be chapters and stuff like that. Then I will come back at the end for an end summary. Okay, so the first thing to do is to just show you what it is that I've got on the table here. And the first thing is the SATA SSD itself. So this is by ORICO, and this is part of their Y-20 series, and this happens to be the 4 terabyte version. Now, ORICO do a 2 terabyte, 1 terabyte, 500 gig, 256 gig and 128 gig variations of this particular drive in the Y-20 series. However, for me personally, I just think that the true value is once you get up to 4 terabytes. However, if you don't need 4 terabytes, there are lower capacity versions. Now, don't forget, the drive comes on its own. It does not come with an enclosure or anything. Now, as far as the enclosure is concerned, this is the one that I am using, and once again, this is by ORICO. It also comes with some bits here that I will explain in a second. Now, this particular enclosure is a USB-C enclosure that has SATA inside of it. Now, it is totally plastic, and I would not worry about the enclosure being totally plastic, and the reason why is because SATA drives don't get that warm, if at all warm, on some of them as well. So you don't need like an alloy enclosure for the likes of like heat dissipation and stuff with SATA SSDs, or at least you don't need it with this one. I've already tested. Now, next to it here, we've got these 2 little sponge pads. Now, they're used to hold the SATA kind of like in place a bit more inside the enclosure. I will put these on it and show you what they do shortly. And then finally, we have got our USB-C to USB-C cable. Now, opening up the enclosure is super easy. It basically splits open into 2 parts, and as we can see here, there's an arrow at one end, and that arrow is pointing that way. So what we need to do is to just push the top half of the enclosure that way, and then the top half will just slide off. So what I'm going to do here is just get my fingers underneath, use my thumbs to push the edge here. So just going to push this forward, and as we will see, it will just push forward, and then we can just take the top half off. And as we can see, we've now got the 2 halves. That's the lid, and then this is the inside part where we've got or like the SATA power and data connections. Now, as far as these foam pads are concerned, on the back of them, they're sticky. So what we need to do is just to pull this protective layer off the back to reveal the sticky side. And then we use that to stick these down onto the inside of the lid of the enclosure and also the bottom of the enclosure. Now, for the top piece of the enclosure, I am going to attach the foam piece on this end here. So the opposite end to this opening here. So this is the opening bit that slides back onto the bottom piece. So once again, I'm going to put it on this end here. So I'm just going to peel it off from the backing there, and then I'm just going to pop it on there. Okay, now I don't think you'd have to be super neat with these things, but there we go. I've stuck it on the inside of the top piece there. And then as far as the bottom of the enclosure is concerned, I'm going to stick the other foam pad on this end here. So the opposite end to where the SATA connections are on the inside. So let me just whiz that off there, and then I will just pop that one on there. Okay, now as far as I can see, both of those are on in probably the best two places where you should be able to put them. And just to be clear, what these are for is to basically grip hold of the SSD to stop it from moving about. Now, to insert the SSD inside the enclosure, that is also super easy. As you can see here on the inside of the bottom piece, this is our SATA power and data connection, and the SSD just slides into that and will only go on one way. So to attach the SSD, we just simply slide its connector end straight onto the connections inside the case. Now, if I just show you here, if I try to put it in that way, obviously it won't attach because these are not aligning. So if I just switch it round this way, which is the correct way, I'll just push it to the end and it will guide itself onto the connectors on the back. Just give it a little bit more of a push. It's now connected, and then that is the SSD now connected to the inside of the enclosure. And then all we need to do is to reattach the top half of the enclosure. Now this will only go back on one way, and it basically slides itself back on. As we can see here, there's that arrow that we looked at before when we pushed it off from the bottom piece of the enclosure. So what we do here, just line it up towards the end of the enclosure at this end. And then if we just kind of put a bit of pressure down on the top of it, it will guide itself in. And then once it's pressed down, push in from this side. And then what we will find is that it will just push itself right back onto the end there. And we can double check that by just having a look at one of the corners here. And as we will see, everything is all flush mounted and lined up properly. And then finally, we just connect one end of the supplied USB-C to USB-C cable to the USB-C port on the enclosure. And then we just connect the other end into our Mac, and we are now ready to format the SSD. Okay, so as we can see here, this is my Mac Mini, and it is an Apple M4 16GB version. So let me just exit that. Now, before I go any further, you may hear some fan noise. Well, that is going to be my external HDMI recorder. It is definitely not the Mac Mini. It is super quiet. Now, if we have a look up here, first of all, in the top right, as we can see, there is my Mac's internal storage, and then there is the SSD connected to it, because of course I've already been using this SSD, so that's the reason why it's already popped up on the desktop. Now, if you are unable to see your Mac's internal storage as an icon on the desktop, or maybe you've got external drives connected but they don't appear on the desktop even though they are formatted correctly, it might be because you need to switch something on in Finder. So let me just show you this quickly. So if I come up to here where it says Finder, I'm going to tap on Finder, and then I am going to tap on Settings. Now, under Settings here, make sure we are on General. We don't want to be on Advanced or Sidebar or Tags, but we want to be on General. And here we can see a list of things with ticks next to them. Now, the first one here says hard disks. Now, there's a tick on this because I've ticked it on. However, if I untick this, what happens is the internal storage icon goes missing from the desktop. So if your internal storage isn't appearing on the desktop, it may be because you need to switch this option on in the settings for Finder. So let me just switch that on, and there we can see there's the internal storage back. And then the same thing for external disks. If I tick that off, as we can see, the shortcut for my external storage goes missing. However, I tick it back on and then it comes back again. Now, just for good measure, I just have all 4 of these options ticked on, and these might be for CDs or DVDs that I might have connected, and also to connected servers and such. So just for good measure, keep all those switched on. Anyways, as we can see there then, there are the 2 drives. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is to just quickly show you that my Mac storage is almost full. So let me just go to info here. In fact, let me just drag this over. As we can see, I've only got 23 gigabytes left as far as the internal storage is concerned. So quite obviously, I really do need to start using external storage here. Now, because I am limited with the amount of storage space that I have got, it also means that my test folder here is only 30 gigabytes in size. So if I just quickly show you this, if I just go to info for the test folder, as we will see, it is 30,012 megabytes in size, so basically 30 gigabytes, and it's got 54 items in it. Now, if I just quickly go into here, these are just like various video files, you know, stuff typically that I would have on an external drive, especially for editing from and stuff like that. So as we can see there, my internal storage is almost full, and it also means that any kind of spare space that I have got for my own files is going to be a bit restricted. Once again, this is why I need to use an external SSD. Okay, so what I am going to do now is to show you how to format the external SSD. Now, when you've put yours together and connected it, it may well pop up with a name. I can't remember what it would come up as now, but because the SSD is already in a format which is exFAT, which the Mac actually does understand, it probably will show up on the desktop. However, whether it shows up or not, don't worry about that, because we are about to format it now anyways. So what we need to do is to open up Disk Utility. Now, if you know where Disk Utility is, you go ahead and open that up. However, if you don't know where Disk Utility is, no worries. If we come up here to the magnifying glass icon, we just tap on that, and this will open up Spotlight Search. So what we need to do is to tap inside where it says Spotlight Search, and we'll start typing in Disk Utility. So DISK, and as you can see here, it has already come up with the prompt now for Disk Utility. So we're just going to tap on there. Now, what I'm going to do here is to format the drive, but before I do that, I would strongly recommend that you do not have any other external storage connected. So don't have any other external SSDs or hard drives, or if you're using anything like docks or adapters, don't have any SD cards connected. And the reason why is because we only want to have one external storage device connected, and that just basically means that we cannot erase the wrong drive. So just make sure you've only got the one connected. Now also, if we have a look up here where it says Disk Utility, next to there we've got this icon with an arrow. We'll just tap on there and we'll make sure that it says Show All Devices. Now that will definitely mean that we can see everything that is connected externally. Now, no matter what you see as far as your external drive is concerned, don't worry if it doesn't look exactly like mine, because mine is already formatted. So what we need to do here is ignore anything to do with containers or any other names underneath container. What we need to do is to select the root of the external SSD. So tap here, and to be doubly clear, this here is the root of your SSD. Do not have anything else selected, only have the root selected. Now what we need to do is to come over to where it says Erase. We will tap on Erase, Now inside here, it is going to give us the options for the type of format that we want to do. Now, because this SSD is only going to be getting used on my Macs, I'm going to use APFS as the format and GUID partition mapping as far as the scheme is concerned. However, if you are going to use your external SSD with something like Windows as well, or maybe Linux or Android or Chrome OS, what you are best doing is to select inside here where it says APFS, so tap into there and then select exFAT. So to be clear, if you are going to share your external SSD with Windows, Linux, Android, Chrome OS, etc., I would strongly recommend that you use exFAT with GUID partition mapping. However, as I've just said, this particular SSD is only going to be getting used on my Macs, so therefore I'm going to leave it on APFS and GUID partition map. Now what I'm going to do is to give it a meaningful name, so I'm going to call this, let's see, ORICO 4TB APFS. Okay, now what I'm going to do is tap on erase. Now this is going to take some time. It might take between 2 to 3 minutes. Now I'm not entirely sure why it takes so long. However, I'm going to guess here the reason why is because this is a SATA SSD being accessed over USB-C, and it is also like 4 terabytes, so it is a large drive. Now when I do these things with say Thunderbolt drives, it's a lot quicker, but I think the reason why is just because the disk access to Thunderbolt is a lot faster anyways using Thunderbolt 4 compared to using USB and stuff like that. But nonetheless, it will take a bit of time, but don't worry about it. It will definitely go through in format. So what I'm going to do now is just to speed through this until it hits the point where it's formatted. Okay, so as we can see here, that format is now done. It says here operation successful, and to be clear, that did take about 3 to 4 minutes. So like I say, just let it do it and it will eventually come to this point where it says operation successful. And then what we do, we just tap on done, and now I can exit the disk utility. So as we can see here now, there is my SSD. It just happens to have the same name and everything as what it did earlier on because I've just reformatted it back to exactly what it was anyways. Now the next thing that I am going to do is the synthetic disk speed test, and for that I'm going to use the Blackmagic disk speed test utility. Now the first thing that I am going to do is to test the Mac's internal storage quickly. So I'm going to have 5 gigabytes as the actual file size for doing the test. Then I'm just going to go to select drive. I'm just going to select my home folder because my home folder is on the internal SSD. I'm going to select open and then start. And as we can see here, there's the write speed. It's around 2000 megabytes per second, and the read speed is around 2800. Now the write speed here is going to start dropping a little bit. The read speed probably stays, well, it's actually gotten a bit faster. Now here's a quick thing. This write speed here, I think this is a bit slower than what it normally is, and I think the reason why is because I've only got 20 gigabytes left on the internal storage. So I think that has caused a problem, and it might make the SSD slow down as far as the internal SSD is concerned. Anyways, what I'm going to do is to stop that test there. Now I'm just going to go back to select target drive, but this time I'm going to select the ORICO there. So I'm going to open that up. Let me just do a quick disk speed test here. So as you can see, as far as the write speed is concerned, it is about 384 thereabouts megabytes per second. Now this will be going slower because it is a slower drive compared to the internal. And then as far as the read speed is concerned, we're on around 356, something like that. So 382 as far as the write speed is concerned, and 356 as far as the read speed is concerned. Now I'm just going to stop that there. Now the thing with these particular types of synthetic tests, I always say to people, just use these as a rough gauge, because they don't always tell you the entire story, especially when you're transferring a lot of data in one go from one place to another as far as SSDs are concerned. And we will see that when I run the test on my MacBook, because I will be moving 400 gigabytes worth of data. So just remember those speeds there. Anyway, let me just exit the disk speed test. Now what I'm going to do is the real world disk speed test. And don't forget, this folder here is only 30 gigabytes in size, and I will be doing 400 gigabytes shortly on my M4 MacBook. But the reason why I am only able to do the 30 gigabytes here is because, as I've already said, I've got hardly any spare space on my internal storage. Okay, so let me just pop that closed there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to just open up the ORICO 4TB external. I'm just going to get my stopwatch here, so get my stopwatch right next to that folder. So what I'm going to do is to drag my test folder here into the ORICO and then start the timer. So let me just drop and start. Okay, so what I'm doing here is to measure how long it takes to write this folder to the ORICO 4TB SSD, and then from that I will then calculate the actual bit rate or the disk speed. So I'm just going to speed this up until I get to the end so I can get the timing for how long it has taken to write the folder to the ORICO 4TB. Okay, I'm just going to come back here and get ready to hit pause once that folder is completely moved over, and there we go. Okay, so that is 1 minute and 15 seconds. Let me just make a note of that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is to reset the timer. I'm going to delete the folder from the desktop there. Let me just empty that bin. And now what I'm going to do is to drag that folder back to the desktop and then click on start. And what I will be doing here is to measure how long it takes to read from the ORICO 4TB. So drag the folder here, let go and hit start. So again, to be clear, what I'm doing here is to measure the read speed of the ORICO 4TB. And once again, I'm just going to speed up through this section, and then I will hit pause at the end to get the reading for my read speed test. Okay, I'm just going to come back in here and get ready to hit pause once that folder's completely written back to the desktop. Should only take a couple of seconds now. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to call that 1 minute and 17 seconds. Let me just make a note of that. Okay, so now that I have got my timings for the reading and the writing for the real world disk speed tests, let me just make some quick calculations as to what the bit rate is or the speed of the drive. Okay, so as far as the real world disk speed tests are concerned for the Mac Mini, the total folder size was 30,012 megabytes. So for the write speed, we divide 30,012 by 75 because it took 75 seconds, and that gives us 400. So that is 400 megabytes per second. Then as far as the read speed is concerned, we take 30,012 and we divide that by 77 because it took 77 seconds to do the read speed test, and that gives us 389, which is 389 megabytes per second. Now, as we can clearly see there, the actual real world disk speed testing for both the reading and the writing were actually faster than what the synthetic test was. Anyways, I'm just going to switch over onto my M4 Max MacBook Pro and run the same tests again, but this time I will be using a folder which is 400 gigabytes in size. Okay, so as we can see then, this is my MacBook Pro and this just happens to be an M4 Max. So let me just close that off. Now the first thing that I will do is to rerun the synthetic disk speed tests, once again just using the Blackmagic Disk Speed Test app. Now what I'm going to do first of all is just show you the speed of the internal drive of the MacBook. So I'm going to go to 5 GB for the size, and then select target. I'm going to once again select my home folder because that's on the internal storage. Let me just open that and then click start. So we're going to see here that we've got some really like dead fast speeds and stuff. Now usually at this point I will be explaining to people that it is important to see that, like, you know, your storage drive internally is much faster than the external drive so that it doesn't become a bottleneck. But no matter what type of Mac we're going to use here, as far as Apple Silicon is concerned, they will all be much faster than the external SSD. But nonetheless, I've just shown you this particular test just for thoroughness. And once again, what I'm going to do is to just stop that, and then I will go back to the targets here and I will select the ORICO again. Then I will retest this. Now this should still be somewhere in the same ballpark as far as the read and write speeds are concerned for the synthetics. As you can see here, it's saying what, 381. What did it say before? 384 or something. It'll be within, like, you know, a few megabytes, you know, similar. And as we can see there, the read speed is saying 366. So once again, it is in the same ballpark as it was earlier on when I was on the M4. Anyway, so I'm just going to stop that there, exit the disk speed test. Now, I'm just going to open up the ORICO drive here. Now this is the folder that I will be using for these tests now. Now if we have a quick look at this folder, as we will see here, it's a lot bigger. So it's 400 gigabytes, so basically 400,000 megabytes in size. But very importantly, this has got 1,527 items inside the folder. So let me just quickly show you. There's basically just like tons of like different files in here. I've got loads and loads of backup files from like loads of stuff from years ago in one of these folders, and then all of these other folders have got things like audio files, video files, picture files and what have you. But as you could see there's basically 1,500 different files within inside that one folder that we're going to be like moving. So it's a very stressful test, this one. So what I'm going to do is to open up my stopwatch if I can find it. So there's the stopwatch. Same thing, I'm going to drag this folder into the ORICO 4TB and hit start. So let me just do that. So drop and start. Now of course what I'm doing here is to measure the write speed again. So dumping the folder to the ORICO is writing to the ORICO. Anyways, I'm going to speed up through this until I get to the end, because as we can see there, this is saying it's going to take about 16 minutes to do the actual test. So we definitely don't want to be sitting here for 16 minutes. So let me just speed this up and I will get the timing at the end. Okay, so I'm going to come back in here and just getting ready to hit pause once this folder has moved over, which should be pretty soon. Just give us a second. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to call that 16 minutes and 51 seconds. So let me just make a note of that. Okay, so I've just made a note of that timing, and don't forget that was the right speed. So what I'm going to do here is to reset the stopwatch. I'm now going to delete the folder from the desktop here. Let me just empty the bin. Now what I'm going to do is to copy the folder back from the ORICO 4TB to the desktop, and in this instance we are going to be testing for the read speed of the ORICO 4TB. So just give us a moment. So drag this to the desktop, so let go and hit start. Okay, so once again what I am going to do is to speed up through this and then get the timing at the end, and then that will allow me to start calculating some bit rates. Okay, so I'm just going to come back in here and get ready to hit pause. It should only be a few
few more seconds off here. Oh, there we go. Right, so that was 16 minutes and 24 seconds. Let me just make a quick note of that. Okay, so now that I have got the timings for the reading and the writing, I'm just going to do some quick calculations to work out what the bit rates are. Okay, so as far as the real-world disk speed tests are concerned on this M4 Max MacBook Pro, using a folder size which was 400,000 megabytes in size, with respect to the write speed, the time it took was 16 minutes and 51 seconds, which is 1011 seconds. So if we divide 400,000 by 1011, we get 395. So that's 395 megabytes per second. Now, as far as the read speed is concerned, that took 16 minutes and 34 seconds, which is 994 seconds. So once again, we divide 400,000 by 994, and that gives us 402, which is 402 megabytes per second. So what we have clearly seen here is that these read and write speeds have hardly changed when comparing reading and writing a folder which was only 30 gigabytes in size, which is what I'd done with the M4 Mac Mini, compared to a folder that was 400 gigabytes in size, which is what I've just done here on the M4 Max MacBook Pro. And also don't forget that once again on the M4 Max MacBook Pro test, the synthetic benchmark was quite a lot slower than what the real world disk speed was. Okay, so to an end summary, and I don't think there's much to talk about here because I would have thought that those speed tests would have given people all the information that they would have needed to have known. But let me just reiterate a couple of points here. It's all well and good when, like, you know, the internet seems to be telling you that what you need with your new M4 Mac of any description is like a super fast Thunderbolt or super fast USB4 SSD and stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong, in certain instances, yes, there are certain advantages to using things like that. However, if the main thing that you do, which is what the main thing is that most people do, is to read data from an external drive, if the reading of that data is fast enough for you, do you really feel any advantage getting anything super fast where it's not going to even assist you in the reading of the data? Now, I'll give you an example of this. I've just done a video showing two types of video edits going on from an external SATA drive, and in both instances it was perfect. And in one instance there was 5 layers of video being read back from the external SATA drive, and everything was perfect. So the thing is, unless you really do need super duper speeds for something very specific, it's highly doubtful that you really do need to go even up to Thunderbolt for these things, because SATA will definitely do a lot for you. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are other options. You can go faster than this with a USB-C drive, which has got something like an NVMe SSD with inside of it. However, even then, you still may not even need those types of bit rates and sustained read and write speeds. You have to remember, even with that 400 gig folder on the MacBook here, we were still hitting around 400 megabytes per second for both read and write. Now, that might be all that somebody needs. 400 megabyte read is definitely well enough for like most video editing scenarios as well, as I've already proven in the video example that I've just explained. So yeah, bottom line is, hopefully I've given people more information here for them to make an informed decision as to what it is that they may or may not need to use. I mean, couple that with some of my other recent videos and you'll get a much clearer picture as to, like, you know, what the benefits are between certain types of drive systems connected externally to any Mac. However, the bottom line here is this: if you did buy an M4 Mac Mini and you were on a tight budget to do that, there's no way you're going to sit there and think to yourself, well, the first thing that I now need is to spend a ton of money on an external drive that ain't really going to give me all the things that it might give to somebody else, in which case something like this is probably all that you need. Anyway, like I say, the information's all there for you and hopefully you found it useful. If you did find it useful, please give me a thumbs up. A sub to the channel would be absolutely awesome. Oh yeah, and there's all links and whatnot in the video description below and all the rest of it. I'm David Harry. Thank you very much for watching this video. Take care and goodbye now.